Professor Abiodun.
Yeah.
When we say democratic values, but you can't rule out the fact that democracy thrives on permanent interests, not permanent enemies, right?
Mm-hmm.
But looking at where Nigeria came from to where we are today, why would people be tinkering towards attacking democracy, national assets and what have you? Why?
Well, that's a complete departure from the normative. You know, it's something that is definitely unsalutary, definitely condemnable, and often comes from those, you know, who feel some sense of annihilation, some sense of exclusion, but rather than charting the legitimate cause, rather than seeking agitation, rather than seeking a remediation of the situation through the legitimate cause, you know, they lack that understanding and rather think that it's only violence, you know, that can lead to the actualization of their dreams and aspirations. We need to understand that in the evolution of systems and society, it comes through either conflict, which sometimes we want to describe as war. But even in conflict situations, you have to come eventually around the negotiation table for consensus to be built. You know, but in modern times, because of the sophistication of understanding, because of shared experience of people have come to the realization that rather than resorting to conflict, rather than resorting to warfare, you know, dialogue, consensus building, conversation, you know, are elegant ways of resolving crises, you know, and disputes. You know, but when you move away from these channels, from this direction, of course, you know, it tends towards criminality, and of course, solutions have to be found to it at the level of sanctioning, prosecution, and at the level of prosecution and sanctioning. But we need to understand again that, you know, democracy is a virtue, you know, is a value of government, you know, that nations have largely subscribed to. Not necessarily the nations that we often say are the bastions of democracy, but every nation, irrespective of its tendency, whether theocratic, you know, or military, or communist, or socialist, you know, they've often had this semblance of representation, and representation is integral to democracy. Representation in terms of involving people or delegates, people who are supposedly coming to speak for the people at one level of the other. Largely, therefore, democracy is often measured in terms of the extent of representation that nations are subscribing to. Countries of the West, you say, largely they subscribe to, you know, widespread, you know, representation, and that's what Nigeria. That's what Nigeria has taken after. In the last 22 years or so, we've been working at it in a painstaking process, and that's why we have to understand again that it's a processual thing. It will take time for us to consolidate, make amends in areas that we are seeing lacunas, but it's just a matter of time. You know, cognizance of the fact that 22 years has been one of progress, you know, one of development, not necessarily at the tangible level, but essentially at the intangible level. And that's why that's a mistake we make sometimes when we want to see democracy, you know, as we want to measure democracy only at the tangible level, at the physical level, through infrastructures and all of that. Infrastructure, yes, we have seen developments, infrastructural development, particularly this government, you know, making miles, achieving so much in the area of infrastructure, but it also goes beyond it. You know, the element of freedom, the element of happiness, you know, the element of an ability for you to, you know, to aspire, you know, to see your hope fulfilled, to see your hope realized. It's also integral to democracy, and it's even much more important because freedom, happiness is innate to the desire of the human being, and democracy is one system of government, you know, that guarantees this. It is implied in every democratic culture. So we need to be celebratory that, you know, we have enjoyed this, so to say, you know, in the last 22 years, and of course we'll continue to enjoy it because we expect that our democracy will continue to be consolidated. But at the level of the tangible, which is the physical, of course we're also making progress, irrespective of limitations in resources. But I've seen government after government, and as really exemplified by this administration in terms of infrastructural development, rails, roads, you know, and attempts at also growing our potentials to ensure stable supply of power. We have seen this happening, but more importantly is for us not to underemphasize, you know, or to de-emphasize the importance of the intangible, which is the fact that we are freer than we used to be under the military. You know, our hopes are higher, than it could ever be, because those days nobody will be talking about development in an atmosphere of unfreedom, because you never knew what was going to happen to you next. Life was short, humanity was degraded. No doubt we have problems of insecurity now, but of course it's also another outlier that we are putting our hands on in terms of finding solutions to them.
Okay. Jamiu, listening to Adeneye, you guys were directly involved in this, given the fact that your father is one of the symbols of this fight, that where we are today. And just a few years away, some persons just feel they can just wake up and attack democracy. Does that make sense?
It doesn't make any sense, and that goes back to what he was saying, the issue of the criminal element. And apart from that, when things get this complicated, you can never know where the problem is coming from, because this is the signs of like the worst type of cancer. This is like the malignant form. If it was benign, we could even stop it, but now it has gotten so advanced in the sense that these people that are doing what they're doing, it has become so complicated that it's hard for even pinpoint who is behind it. Definitely they have been sponsored, and some of them are not being sponsored. Some of them are marginalized, and some of them are actually not marginalized. There are so many issues that have to be tackled, but I think the best way we go about it is to start from the grassroots. These people, they are from families, they have parents. Government is doing its own work. We Nigerians have to also do our own work as well. We have to go down to the grassroots, to the family level. Before somebody goes to school, he has a family values. We, as he said, we focus a lot on the infrastructure and all of that, but we have to build ourselves so that we actually become more developed along with the democracy, because times are changing. It's not like before. Now we have a dissemination of information, we have the social media, a lot of things are coming in, coming out. People have access to information more than ever before, so that has changed the way people think and how they think. So that makes it easier to actually influence people to do things that they're not supposed to do, to the point that it even makes it harder to know where the problem is coming from, because the communication is so easy. And at the end of the day, the family bonds, because of economic hardship, people are beginning to fail in their roles. Like a father, what is meant to do, monitoring his child, they look for earning an income, they come back home late, they don't know who their children are mixing with, they don't know, because all these people that are doing these things, they come from families, and these families are the ones that are supposed to take note before even government, before they can do this damage. Definitely the families are meant to know something is wrong somewhere. So we have to government has to reach out to the Nigerians in terms of the grassroots, family institutions. We have to start not just thinking about the issue of tackling this thing from let's get the police involved. Let's go back to the basics, to the family institution. Let's go back to the fundamentals. Teaching, a concept. Like in America, I always tell people, they have an American dream. People know that this is the American dream, you can achieve it. And they are patient and they work hard, but we in Nigeria, we don't really have any pathway. We don't really have any theoretical, background or institution that we can say, okay, let's use this as a basis to actually develop ourselves, our character, our personality, and our goals.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Let's go to Timmy Prayer. Listen, Timmy Prayer, given where we are coming from, by now one would have expected that Nigeria would have evolved to a stability where we say we have an entrenched democratic culture, and where no matter the ill feelings, no matter the misgivings, no matter how aggrieved we are, we protect it. I remember an illustration somewhere in a cartoon in one of the national dailies, three hefty hands struggling very hard to keep the Nigerian map in the right position. And people just become from nowhere. As much as we know, democracy is evolving. It's on a destiny. It's on a journey always, no destination. By now, we should have a seasoned democratic culture where people will not even think towards attacking democracy.
Very much. It is really disturbing. We have had this democratic run for 22 years, and while that calls for celebration, why we should be happy that we have at least left the dark days of military interventions behind. Remember, it was an average of one military coup every 3.6 years. So now 22 years of unbroken democracy calls for a lot, so celebration. But like you said, by this point in our democratic voyage, we should have, at least to some level, imbibe the tenets of democracy, the culture that sustains democracy. But I think we can lay that blame on so many factors. One of those factors would be the socialization process. So since 1999, when this democracy came on board, what have we done as a country to instill democratic attitudes in people? For example, is there a national plan to democratize the consciousness of Nigerians? And this you can do, for example, by having a curriculum, let's say at the primary to even university level, where students have the opportunity maybe to elect a class rep, elect a course rep, and then all of those politics that comes with education at the basic to tertiary level. So when you do that, the university or the secondary or primary school authorities are able to regulate all of these democratic programs at that level. People grow into that culture of participation, of tolerance, but we do not do that. When it's every election season, we begin to see all of this anti-democratic culture playing out. But it is not exactly surprising. If you look again at the state of Nigeria, the way we are currently constituted, if it's the economy you want to look at, or the problem of corruption, or the security situation, all of these provide grounds for bitterness, grounds for anger, particularly the frustration over unemployment and poverty. People always want to blame someone else, and when they believe there is someone somewhere who is responsible for their pain, and then they perceive that the democratic situation, the democratic experience benefits some while it disadvantages others, then you begin to see some of these actions targeting the democracy. But it calls for a lot of work on the part of both government and citizens to keep this democracy going, because we are not clear, we are not out of the woods.
Yeah, still with you. When can we end this trend where if it does not favor me, it is bad? But in other claims, whether I'm there or not, what we are looking at is the national goals. But part of the problem appears as though, if for instance, Timi Priye is the minister and Adeniyi is not the minister, Abiola will liaise with Adeniyi and they'll be fighting Timi Priye for no just cause. When can we drop that perception?
I think, unfortunately, if it benefits people to continue to do that, they will never drop such behavior. So we should find a way of punishing such behavior. People should have the common interest at heart and be always willing to support anyone who has been given the authority to govern. Unfortunately, we haven't disciplined people. I think this is a society that also doesn't keep record of how people responded to leadership when they were not in leadership position. In many countries, serious record is kept. So if today Timi Pere Alison did not support someone who had the mandate to provide leadership, tomorrow when I aspire to leadership, I would also be reminded that at some point in time you were not cooperative. So how are we sure you can capably deliver in this position? So society should have a way of punishing people who do not want to cooperate. But overall, I think people should understand the importance of the need to work together to make this country move forward.
Back to Adeniyi. Democratize the consciousness of Nigerians. Across board, we know as much as history is no more a subject in schools. Before now, in my primary school days, I got to know so much about the history of various parts of the world, various parts of the country, as though maybe I grew up there. Now, if people could just wake up and start attacking democracy, attacking state national infrastructure, then how can we? Because if truly, like Timi Priye said, if we democratize the consciousness of Nigerians, towards democracy, that could change. So what pattern or model of value mindset reorientation can we deploy?
Yeah, very good question, but also a very tough process too, because attitudinal reorientation can be very, very problematic, in any system, and it's not necessarily peculiar to Nigeria. Oftentimes some of these criminal acts, are not just, happening because they have to happen. They came in through a process of neglect, a process of exclusion, and through frustration and failed desires to actualize hopes and dreams. And if you want to put it very primitively, through the ability to put food on the table. But rather than being elegant about ways of solving it, because of the deprivation and the deprivation of the mind thinks that it's only a resort to criminality that can help him or her out. And that's why you saw resort to destruction, even critical infrastructures that ordinarily should help you, and the community to bring about happiness and progress. But what is also central to it is the inability of our institutions to function very well. Institutions can actually be abstract, they can actually be actual, on both sides, and it can also even be much more. But in our institutions, we have had large failures of these institutions and situations where individuals are stronger than the institutions. So rather than us privileging institutions, we rather privilege individuals. And individuals also see themselves, or they rather see the institutions as existing to work for their own good. Now, if we have institutions functioning well in the interest of the community, in the interest of the citizens, so you see a natural, shaping of the process, the natural shaping of citizens' attitude in the way of progress and compliance, and you see them investing their hope not just in the system as a whole, but of course in the nation and in the future of the nation as well. But you have this situation where over the years, we have had lethargy of leadership, reluctance of leaders, to work in the interest of the people. And when we talk about this leadership, we've made this point severally. It's not just about political leadership, or to be calling on the president or the vice president or the governors and all of that. Leadership is present in all sectors of the society, from the family, to smaller sectors, to ministries, departments, and agencies. There's this reluctance. People tend to think that, once I find myself in those positions, my priority is to work for myself, friends and family, as against the community. So within that concentric circle of leadership, you find the individual in the middle, satisfying the friends, and family, ahead of the community. Whereas, the service delivery process should begin from the outer ring, from the community, maybe to the family. Even if you serve the community, of course, it's going to rub off, the family and the friends, and eventually yourself, and you leave legacy in the process. So when this process or this circle has been reversed wrongly, when we have had a reversal of the circle, we've seen lethargy of leadership, at all levels, then you find, a slight deterioration into a state of anomy, reflecting in individuals thinking that they can take laws into their hands, or thinking that they can ventilate their anger, their frustration, by destroying institutions of state. And that's why we're identifying the institutions of democracy. I don't want to believe that the attack is essentially on democratic institutions. If democratic institutions is simply about physical infrastructure, and physical infrastructure is just they can be replaced, they are both in the hard and the soft sense of it. It's not going to stop. It shouldn't be able to stop our election, because democracy is a process, it's an attitude of the mind which we are gradually cultivating. And of course, God forbid, if anything even happens to INEC, it shouldn't stop a democratization process, because the culture we're already reviving. So it is becoming ideological into us, and it's something that we have accepted because we have seen it as a situation where we cannot detract from, we cannot go back from it. So the structures are just one item, but the acculturation process is also still ongoing, and I don't see us detracting from it, even though the physical destructions are condemnable. But if we strengthen our institutions, conscious of the fact that as individuals, as humans, we are limited in time and space, but institutions are always strong enough to outlive, human functionality. Okay. If we strengthen it, of course, we will be able to make a substantial change in terms of attitudinal reorientation, which is also very key, in the evolution of strong democracy.
Okay. To to put a rest to the issue, Jamil, is yes, we'll say we came from military rule to democracy, and we'll have to build democracy. When it came, we had nascent democracy, nascent democracy. Right now, nascent has disappeared. We are beginning to stabilize. So I ask, how will Nigeria look in the eye of the Committee of Nations if we don't hold this thing so dearly and build it to stardom?
Well, I think when the former Secretary of State for the United States, Hillary Clinton, came to Nigeria, she made a point I never forget. She said, Nigeria has too many big men and not enough big institutions. So for democracy to work, there has to be big institutions. And for them to be big institutions, the individual has to play a more limited role. It's the institution that now takes charge. That's why I'm happy about this constitutional hearing that is happening. When it's going on, people should actually give this as one of the suggestions, that they have to actually change the constitution a little bit and make these positions less attractive to people. Because when they make it less financially rewarding, then the people that actually want to serve will now come out. It's like you put like sugar, definitely ants will come near it. When everything is so lucrative, people that might not actually have the interest of the country or their own personal interest will go towards it because of the rewarding character, the rewarding nature of those positions. But by the time they have the reviews and the constitutional amendments, then it now becomes less attractive financially. Then the people that really love the country patriotically will now come out. Okay. And that's a point I think is very important. Then speaking of the destruction of these assets, we have to keep in mind is that Nigerians, no matter how bad a lot of people how depressed they are not against democracy. Those destructions there's a targeted plan so that elections will not hold in a certain part of the country, because if elections do not hold in that part of the country, then no democratic government can actually go on, then there will be anarchy. So this is actually the plan. So those destructions does not point at a discouragement or maybe people are no longer interested in democracy. No, it's just maybe a handful of people, and not even up to 1%, that are actually involved in these destructions. So when we make it seem like as if it was an attack on democracy, it is a criminal attack so as to ensure there is no election, so that there's anarchy, so that that's the plan A. Then plan B, of course, the people that are doing these things know where they are going after that. Okay. So there's no real attack against democracy by Nigerians. A lot of people might not be happy about some of the realities of the democracy, but they should also hold themselves partly to blame. And the reason why is because democracy, according to the United States, where I studied political science, they said democracy is a participatory democracy. Nigerians have never really understood that democracy involves their participation. That is a key part.
Whether you're happy or not,
you participate in a very good way. Even if you want to criticize the government, give alternative suggestions. If you want to criticize, give suggestions that are realistic. But when you criticize and you now give options that you know that are not possible, then you are criticizing for the fun of criticizing. And as a human being, these people are in government. They're human like us. They get discouraged. I will get discouraged if every day people are attacking me, because some of them, they might not even sleep all night.
Let's hold it there. But
yes,
like you said, if truly the institutions become strong and not strong men, all these threats will amount to naught, because no matter how they destroy, no matter how they try to distract,
that's right,
the institutions will sustain their positions and they will surmount the threats.
Yes.
Well, let's rest it now. Still talking about democracy, in my opening I referred to the parliament as an engine of democracy, because at the parliament you find all parts of the country represented. The entire Nigeria is there. And I said, when you have mild dramas at parliament, people fighting, people disagreeing, it is concluded to be the beauty of democracy. And I ask, is the beauty of democracy really beautiful? So to Timmy, let's look at the parliament. Look. The second year 21.
Okay.
What's your impression about the parliament? How far it has functioned?
Generally about how business is conducted in the parliament in the past 22 years.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so, the parliament in every democracy is the engine room. Unfortunately, in this part of the world, we tend to center on the executive, but the parliament is where decisions are made that could impact generations and affect people. So it's understandable. Even in more mature democracies, you find a lot of these squabbles. You see fisticuffs and people throwing chairs and all that. So it is not particularly disappointing to see that, even though we are seeing less of it. But the problem I have with the parliament is that they do not yet understand their position in a democracy. This unnecessary defilement to the executive, becoming like a rubber stamp body instead of a group of legislators who should act independently, is for me more worrying than even the fighting. If you fight and then eventually roads are delivered or electricity is delivered, that is a good fight. But when you fight because you need to protect someone somewhere in the executive arm of government or some personal interest, that becomes for me a problem. In the past 22 years, I think the parliament has been like a seesaw or a roller coaster. We have seen the highs and the lows, and then quite a lot of good decisions have been made at the parliament, but so many very bad ones have also been attempted to be made, at least. For example, since we're talking about democracy, you see so much effort to censor the civil society, curtail the civic space and all that through some of the social media bill, the CSA regulation bill, and the hate speech bill. Some of those parliamentary moves do not really support democratic consolidation. So going forward, we want to see a parliament that is pro-people and one that understands that in a democracy it holds the key to change and happiness.
I'll still come to you, just hang on there. Professor Edeni, you heard what he said. Yeah. I don't know whether you agree with him that as at now he feels that is his position, that the parliament do not yet understand its position in a democracy. And pulling up from there, maybe you agree or you don't agree, but clearly, when can we see bipartisanship really play out in the face of the Nigerian parliament?
Yeah, well,
because I ask this, most times it's as though we want to first argue from our platforms before arguing nationalistic.
Well, I think it's a very critical point to make, but we need to understand that the parliament is a springboard around which democracy rotates. Every nation, every system is defined by its parliament, or the system of government is essentially defined by the nature of its parliament. And the only difference between the military and the civil administration, for instance, apart from taking decisions without consultation, is the existence of the parliament. So the fact that we've had a parliament in existence in the last 22 years just means that we are in a democratic dispensation ordinarily. But if you look at the parliament from the 60s, from the time of Legico to the time of Akpo and the time when the present National Assembly, it hasn't really changed in terms of how we appreciate their presence in the affairs of the state. It has not changed because you find out that the Nigerian person or the nature of the Nigerian person has to be reflected in the parliament in existence. Because just to say that parliamentarians don't drop from the sky, they evolve from the people. Yeah. So whatever we see, whatever they are exhibiting, is a product of the society that we all belong to. So if we want any form of change, we have to be concerned about the reorientation that we talked about in the first instance. And if you look at Parliament is that, and they're just coordinate arms of government. They're not supposed to be at loggerheads. They are supposed to complement each other, and in complementing each other, we're supposed to see results. Results can come, like we also alluded to earlier on, through conflict, and it can also come through dialogue and understanding. Whichever comes first, what is most important is people-centric, policies, decisions that are geared toward satisfying the interest of the community or the generality of the people. So if it will be brought about through conflict. Sometimes it can be so in the process of trying to get to reach an agreement or an accord. But again, if there's a mutual understanding, like I see existing between the present parliament and the executive, leading to result, then why not? And do not forget that we have had an increased understanding in the present parliament, which some people, like maybe Timpere also said, alluded to maybe rubber stamping. I'm not going to see it in that light. I just see increased understanding, an ability to collaborate better, an ability to foster bipartisan understanding, essentially through the instrumentality of the leadership of both arms of the assembly. Do not forget, if you look at these individuals, we have the senior president, for instance, solid education, solid experience in the legislature, and of course his colleague too in the House of Representatives, solid education, solid experience in the House of Reps. So ordinarily we should expect that there's an increased appreciation of what their responsibilities are, and if they can bring about results, through consensus with the executive. Of course, I would rather prefer that route instead of first of all going into conflict, or disagreement, playing to the gallery, so that people will say, they are standing up to the executive. When you are engaged in an action, what is this supposed to be for? Of course, there should be a rewarding situation at the end of the day.
Asked differently, but almost about the same question. Now, there's a national challenge before the National Assembly, whether Senate or the House of Representatives. And rather than Nigeria see the senators, see the members thinking towards Nigeria. For instance, Dadeni belongs to a particular party, you belong to a political party. Rather than us meet and look, what is the position of Nigeria? How do we now think up towards consulting the political parties? That's where I'm hinging on. When can we see the parliament holistically come out most times and just close shop with the political parties and look at Nigeria as their common interests?
Well, I think what you're asking for is like very, very difficult, because even America, that is like the head of our we are democratic and we are following the example. Up till now, the president of the United States has this same problem you're talking about. People always think about the party affiliation. Sometimes they even have a bill that might actually even be beneficial for the American, but just so that the president of the United States doesn't get the popularity, some people work against it. It's something that's going to go on and on and on. So I guess what we have to do in Nigeria is to always make sure that whenever we are voting people in, we vote in the right people. People that have actually displayed uncommon, ability and uncommon, patriotism for the country as a whole. Not just people that we don't even know exactly, or with questionable characters. Because at the end of the day, if we don't get that part right, it's like a house, a foundation. You don't get the foundation right, no matter how beautiful the structure is afterwards, it will not amount to anything. So I think everything starts from the voting process. When you want to vote for people, you look at their background very well. Not just the education, the personal character of the person. Is somebody that thinks more of others before himself? These are the things that, because when we choose the wrong people and they go to parliament, we're going to definitely be having all these issues that you just mentioned, because it's good to always think about your country as a whole first, not just the patriotism, not just the party, and all these cheap political games, but they will always think this way, because there are politicians some of them are politicians that don't really think much about their community, think more of themselves.
Okay, let's proceed. Let's look at the quality of legislation, the kind of bills, the kind of laws that have been churned out. If you want to look at from 1999, where we came from, then the next 2 hours will not be done here. Let's narrow down the last 6 years, the kind of laws, the kind of bills, the relationship between the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. What's your perspective to this?
Yeah, the last 6 years, I would say, has been a mixed experience. When President Buhari first came, because of his anti-corruption agenda and how it went as far as the legislature and the judiciary, we had a little moment of lack of cooperation, particularly with the Parliament's response to the President's request for attention on appropriation bills. That went on for almost 2 or 3 years. But other than that, I think it's been far cooperative, I would say, Maybe because some of the executive requests to the parliament have never bothered on very critical aspects of our society, where people will have to make very solemn and tough decisions. So I would say in the past 6 years, the bills have come as they should, expectedly. But I still will have to say, I mean, I come from the civil society sector, where I believe in the past 6 years we have seen too much movement in the parliament, often in collaboration with the executive to shrink the civic space, and that has been reflected in attempts to come up with several laws. Unfortunately, and maybe fortunately, I should say, for us, and unfortunately for the drafters of those bills, they never saw the light of day, but the efforts continue. So I would say mixed. Yeah, mixed.
Okay, let's proceed. You heard his position there.
Yeah.
Whether you want to agree or not, the 9th National Assembly, anyone want to compare, who want to be pulling off from, how was the 8th National Assembly, how was the 7th, how was the 6th, and compared to where they are today? Let's see your perspective.
Okay, but I think they've been making progress, really. You know, they've been making progress, and you know, sometimes the governance process itself can be very complex. You know, what matters is how you are able to achieve results within those complexities. We have seen some landmark bills. You know, the one that I can really recall first is the one that tried to reorder the budget cycle from in accordance with the Gregorian calendar year, January to December. Earlier on, we have had this alteration, in fact, coming from the military, and unfortunately we inherited it from the military, whereby budgets were released at any time. You know, and of course, you know, this can be problematic for the economic indices. You know, the economic sphere is an intangible that relies heavily on planning, you know, the ability to predict processes and procedures for you to be sure of what's going to happen based on fiscal policies, you know, and financial regulations. You know, it's been untidy until we had this 9th National Assembly. They came to and reordered it, and they've been consistent at that in the last 2 years. So that's quite commendable. And of course, we've had some. We also have the offshore build, you know, which ordinarily should increase our revenue base. Sometimes we've been outsmarted directly or indirectly, consciously or unconsciously, by some multinational companies. You know, so this was rectified really at the start of these National Assembly. You know, so progress is being made, and the point I was trying to make earlier is that, you know, we now have a better pedestal towards the building of consensus, you know, and of course, in any situation, particularly in a democracy, which is often a confliction of interest, you know, because our kind of society is a fragile, vulnerable one. You know, in those kind of arrangements, you have to be concerned about consensus building, and building consensus is about fostering understanding, you know, through the presentation of your own position. And the strength of a system is actually measured by the tactics and strategy that you put in place, you know, in the building of this consensus in this process actually. And that's why sometimes we see leaders making sacrifices that you'll be wondering from the outside or from outside, you know, why this kind of decision was taken. But so many things will probably have gone into it, you know, before those conclusions are reached. That's how it works really. So from my own point of view, I think, you know, there's a better ground for the building of consensus, okay, you know, in the present dispensation.
Okay, it's the Democracy Day 2021, and like we told you from the beginning of the program, at the opening where Fisayo anchored it, we are sure that we shall be going through the landscape of the country to bring you up to speed of developments there. Right now, we shall be going to Enugu, where we're looking at 22 years of Nigeria going through the process of refining raw materials into sparkling gold. the different facets of the country have rolled out various policies and programs that will place the country on a progressive pedestal. In Enugu State, the present administration has made concerted efforts to ensure security of lives and property, as well as alleviate the sufferings of the people.
It's a beautiful day in Enugu State as Nigeria celebrates 22 years of democracy. People are going about their normal businesses. Life is smooth, the weather is clement, and people are having fun. But meanwhile, this is the Enugu State House of Assembly, the very engine room where all the policies and programs that affect the people of the state emanate from. As Nigeria celebrates 22 years of uninterrupted democracy, let's feel the pulse of residents on how far so far.
Democracy, you will recall from the Greek era of Socrates and Plato, that is the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And I can tell you that in Nigeria, for example, the transition from military rule to democracy, which is our celebration of Democracy Day, has been something that we are maturing and of course beginning to actually inculcate all aspects of democracy. Freedom of speech, a constitution, freedom of movement, and of course freedom of religion. So Nigeria is actually becoming a more civilized society with democracy. The practice of democracy gives everyone a chance to actually contribute in the governance of the country. It makes every state where they can have elections, and in election you do primaries and of course elect the best candidate that will bring dividends of democracy, like development all the way to the grassroots. So our constitution is working, and we hope that with the more years we practice democracy, the better we get at it. So we can say we have some growing pains with democracy, but I still believe that is better than military rule.
Do you think we all are on track?
Well, yes, we are on track to a great extent, because elections it makes everyone to become part of democracy. You cast your vote. Everyone is freedom to register to vote, and of course you have a candidate of your choice. That is freedom to actually practice what you want to in democracy. So we are all playing a role, but we're believing that with the practice of democracy, the system will improve.
From the foregoing, you will agree with me that Nigeria is still evolving. We all have roles to play to sustain this democracy, and we believe that with time we will collectively take Nigeria to the expected place of glory. From Enugu, it's back to the studios.
Thank you so much. They're from Enugu, and I go to Timipre. Timipre, let's look at within the ambit of the building a democratic culture in Nigeria. Like I said at the beginning, when we began, it was always nascent democracy, but over 20 years after, we can't say it's a nascent democracy anymore. We should be thinking towards building on the culture and stabilizing on it. So subnational and national relationship, how do you assess it?
As to the point you made, nascent democracy or not, I agree. This is 22 years. If Nigeria was a child, by now that child should be completing university, so it's no longer a nascent democracy. We now have models to copy from. The US is there, France is there, the United Kingdom is there. When those democracies began, they never had any model. They were the radical ideas that have now formed the idea that we now copy. So we expect a lot from both government and citizens, so we strengthen our democracy. But coming to the question of the relationship between the tiers of government, particularly the national and the subnational, I would say the constitution that we run has to change drastically to make that relationship also change. I believe if we have a federal democracy like we claim we do, it should reflect in the apportionment of powers and resources. Right now, the federal government has just too much powers and too much resources, while the states are not having so much. So, and that has been a point of contention. For example, the question of revenue allocation, how should it be done? Who should have this and who should do that? It has been a point of contention. but it has implications even for Nigerians, because there are roads that state governments, for example, can build, but they have been designated federal roads, and there are no federal allocations. People plying the road can die as a result of accident. Now, a state government decides to take action, and then they have to wait either for the approval of the federal government, or when they go ahead to do it, they begin to work for years to get reimbursed. So all of those constitute challenges to the relationship between the federal and the state government. I also think that the subnational governments in a democracy that is a federation should have as much powers as we can say about subnational governments in the US. Many of those states, take California for example, or maybe you want to take Texas, have economies that are as big as 4, 5, 6 countries in Africa put together. That is because they have both the authority to make certain decisions within their areas of influence, as well as the resources, control of resources to go about delivering development. So for me, that is a major issue that we will have to address, and we are so happy that the review of the Constitution is going on. That is one area civil society organizations are working to address. We believe it will also help in addressing the security situation we have now. The Constitution says we will have a national police controlled by the federal government, by the president, and then governors are called chief security officers, but they do not have control over the police. Even though a governor tells the commissioner of police in his state to take a particular course of action, he will need the approval of the IG, and probably the IG will need the approval of the president. So all of those constitute challenges to the relationship between the federal and state governments, but they have implications for our general well-being, particularly security.
Discussing democracy in Africa and also narrowing down to Nigeria. Sometime I had an interface with the African Global Institute of Democracy. I can't remember the exact name of that institute now. And we said, yes, democracy, as beautiful as it may be, when can we have our own peculiar democracy? It's either we had the parliamentary system fashioned after Britain, and now we are doing the presidential system fashioned after the United States of America. 20 years and above. Is it not time we start thinking either remodeling our democratic style or approach to adapt with the realities of our morals, our cultures, to move on with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very germane issue, and that's why people have been talking about being ingenious, being creative about the kind of system that we want to fashion out, And of course, to some extent, we'll say that we are largely presidential, just like the American democracy is. But even our democracy is not completely American, largely American, but not completely American, because there are some variables in the American system that are not evident in our own system, which is also a point that we need to note. But of course, it may also be the reason why we are having rising agitation for the retweaking of our constitution, for us to have some levels of devolution, some levels of restructuring in such a way that it will be ingenious to us, because sometimes aping and idolizing, foreign models can be problematic in terms of oppression for a nation, as the case could be. And that's why we also say politics is local, because we have to understand our history, our culture, our religion, our particular patterns and particularities, so that we can develop our own model after our own original experiences. So it's okay, valid proposition, and I think it's also consistent with the moves to change the constitution. And in changing the constitution or reviewing the constitution, we expect that the inputs of nationalities will feature there in such a way that we could say that there are some things that have now that are new, that we've properly thought through and that are evolving from our own our own experiences as a people. And if you look at the world around us as well, you know, countries that have largely developed in terms of infrastructures and utilities, you know, are countries that have been original, that have been creative about their own development model. You know, if you look at them based on the indices of other nations, you may say they are not free. You may say they are not progressive in terms of democracy, but in terms of infrastructural development, in terms of what makes the human being happy, they have made substantial progress. United Arab Emirates is, you know, readily comes to my mind, and of course, what about China? You know, what about Malaysia? Singapore every day is a reference point for development, but Singapore is not a democracy. You know, but of course, we're not talking about their system of government. We're talking about development. You know, so development should actually come first in our own reckoning before we are concerned about model. And the model, of course, should be ingenious to the people. But if you want to completely shape and analyze what is evident in another country, of course there will be problem, and that's why we are having some of the problems we are having now. But it is good progress that we are also making moves to review aspects of our constitution. But finally, on this point, Omini, we also have to be concerned about not romanticizing with constitution too much, you know, because there are nations in the world that don't have written constitutions, but these nations are functioning fine. New Zealand is one, Israel is the second, United Kingdom is also another. They have unwritten constitution, but they are functioning fine, which tells me that the human element is also very important in many kind of model or in the operations of constitution, whether written or unwritten. So it's not all about reviewing our constitution. Yes, we can review our constitution. So when we are done with it, what about the humans that will operate that constitution? How ready are we to build a nation as a people? Okay, then how ready are we to be concerned about reorientating our attitudes in a way that will be suitable, you know, for the good of the community rather than for self-aggrandizement?
Okay, let me quickly parry that to Jamil. Now, why I asked that question, most conflicts, challenges in Nigeria today have rather worked with committees or commissions of inquiry that attempted or ventured into adopting the peculiarities of such communities without necessarily using maybe the Westminster model to resolve crisis. So, and I keep asking that same question, when can we look at reviewing, but quickly this to you. I remember vividly on June 12, 1993, I was I'll go to Kano shortly after that. On June 12 precisely, on that very day, while Abdullahi was still in school, maybe not of voting age, I voted on that day. And at the end of the day, today we are celebrating June 12 as a symbol of democracy in Nigeria. Briefly, your reaction. Just to react briefly.
Okay, yes, it's very, very...
What it was and what it is today.
Well, it was a very, very emotional day, you know, because, I mean, that day, even my father, you know...
Is today an emotional day for you?
No, it's actually emotional, but not as emotional as it was that day. You know, my father did not sleep as well, you know, he was... he couldn't sleep that night, you know. He kept talking about the elections and, like, how it's going to change the country. And I'm glad that we have reached this stage now and the democracy is now finalized. And, you know, I don't think there's any going back. You know, Nigeria can never be like Mali or any other country like that. Absolutely. Because we've been through June 12, we've been through the pain of June 12, and June 12 has more or less paved the way for Nigeria to actually, you know, be democratic for as long as Nigeria exists, by the grace of God.
Okay. Well, Jamil and Abiodo, let's quickly go to Kano, where we are being joined by Ali, President, Nigerian Guild of Editors. Good to see you on the program.
Well, thank you for having me. Well, thank you for having me.
And congratulations on your re-election.
Oh, well, actually, I've just been voted into office for the first time. Actually, I'm the Deputy President.
Wrong. I was told you are the President of Nigerian Guild of Editors. Okay, correction taken. Quickly, when you talk about democracy, and today Nigeria, it is official, it is legal, celebrating Democracy Day in Nigeria. And when we say, who are those who are at the fringes, at the tunnels, fighting for Nigeria to have democracy? The media is very, very strategic here. So how do you feel about today?
Today is quite significant, like most speakers have said in the past in the course of this program. I feel that the media has done its role very well, discharged its responsibilities very well as the fourth estate of the realm. And from the days of colonialism, the media has been in the front for the struggle for independence, for against also military rule. And you will say that the media kept especially the issue of June 12 in the front burner over the years until the present government actually, let me say, sanctified the date to make it official as Democracy Day. People have asked me, why June 12? Why make Democracy Day June 12? Quite unlike the time the military retreated on May 29, 1999 to June 12. Now, I always say this. To me, at the time, June 12 brought together the very best of Nigerians. What I mean, the very best. June 12 is symbolic in so many ways. One of which was the fact that for a change, Nigerians forgot the fault lines. What I mean, the fault line, ethnicity, religion, and voted for people they were comfortable with. If you remember, prior to June 12, the election at the time, people compartmentalized everything along, you know, the usual fault lines, ethnicity, religion. But, you know, for the very first time, what is now referred as a Muslim ticket. If you recall, Abiola and his running mate, Babagana Kingibe, both of them Muslims, coasted to victory. And one very interesting thing that happened even at the time was, at that time, I recall, I was in the newsroom as a news editor and the state-run newspaper here in Kano, when one of the presidential spokesmen now, Garba Shehu, was also the editor-in-chief of the Triumph at the time. And the people of Kano actually voted against their own son. That is Bashir Tofa, who contested against Abiola. And you know, it was kind of, they demonstrated their political sophistication by identifying with someone who they think was more relatable to them than their own son. I have never seen that happen until maybe before 1960, before Nigeria's independence, when the mayor of Enugu was someone from, Altine, when he was voted, a Fulani who was voted in Enugu as the mayor of Enugu in 1956. And some other places where people not necessarily of not having their origins rooted in the locality they were voted for. So June 12, you could say, is quite an emotional thing for a lot of Nigerians, and Nigerians who came together to vote for candidates away from the usual fault lines, which have become so visible, so prominent these days. These days it's unthinkable to have a ticket where you have two major releases. Somehow it has become unofficial that, look, you can have a single faith ticket to run. So yes, it's quite significant. And coming to the question of the role the media played in keeping June 12 in the front burner, notwithstanding post June 12 annulment in around June 20th or 21st, 1993, also brought to the fore a lot of other divisions, which eventually the struggle was reduced to north-south kind of thing. Today is quite significant, and I think you must give it to the government for recognizing June 12 as Democracy Day, because June 12 was the day a lot of Nigerians freely, on their own volition, at no prompting, and a lot of people adjudged that election as the freest in recent history. And you could tell from the relatively secured environment at the time in 1993 when the election was conducted, The turnout was quite impressive, if I recall, because like I said, some of us were in the field at the time. We were in the newsroom monitoring events. Like I said earlier, I was news editor on the state-run newspaper, The Triumph. So yes, June 12 finally is like, yes, but then June 12 also means different thing to different people. But those who cast their vote in support of Abiola and Kingibe ticket, June 12 will remain evergreen. Yes.
Brother Ali, still on you. I would have asked you where you were, but you have already said where you were at that time of June 12. I voted on that day. I wasn't practicing them, but inching towards practice. But if you say, besides the fact that the media was in the trenches for democracy to come from 1999, for instance, and the media sustained keeping June 12 struggle in the front burner. Now, it has finally been institutionalized. Would you say, in terms of sustaining democratic ideals, building on democracy in Nigeria, has the media done well?
Yes, the media has done very well. Yeah, but you would say the dawn of the digital media has also brought in its wake a lot of things to be desired, especially in gatekeeping, because the dawn of the digital media especially has thrown to the dog the traditional restraint and circumspection expected of the media. And now the media, there is this, if you like, this cutthroat competition to be first with the news, to break the news. And in the process also letting its guard down. But beyond that, the mainstream media, you will say, yes, a lot of gatekeeping is going on there. And you can see a lot of, if you like, sophistication with the coming of, like I said, technology. I recall until recently, until technology came to the rescue, when you have, especially in print media, you have desktop publishing. It used to be quite Herculean to be fresh with the news. Most papers, especially those domiciled in Lagos, they have first, second, and third editions even. I think in the 70s and the 80s, only New Nigeria, of all the nation's newspapers, have two publishing locations, Lagos and Kaduna, which makes it possible to come to town with the freshest of news. But now with the dawn of digital media, you find what people now describe as media convergence. You have print media also having digitally based television and using various social media platforms to take home their message, to constantly update their readers and their viewers with the latest of stories. So you will say, yes, the media has evolved, courtesy of technology, courtesy of digitalization, courtesy of digital age. Yes, and like I said, however, in the process also, you find out that the media has, like any other perhaps sector, also having some things that could be improved with time, with greater training, like this thing about gatekeeping. Unfortunately and regrettably, sometimes even mainstream media, they wait. I mean, they drive their content from social media. There are instances where mainstream media have relied on social media or digital media, not really social media as such, for their content. And sometimes the content could be quite misleading. Instances where images, texts are taken out of context, out of time zones, and then represented as fresh and current. And in instances where they could have inflamed passions, they could have also triggered a lot of things that could not, I mean, they are not desirable. So yes, the media has done commendably well. At least it has managed to keep in check the three arms of government. And that's why the media is even, as it's been called, the fourth estate of the realm, superintending over these three arms of government. Yes, so the media has maintained its role as the watchdog. But then, like I said, gatekeeping, especially with digital media and social media has taken a beating, yes. But all in all, I would say the media has done commendably well. And I must say also that time, since the dawn of this democracy, since the dawn of the Fourth Republic, the media has been given a free hand to run. Until recently, where we've been having this back and forth, especially with the excesses, if you like, of some media organization, where sometimes people perceived as being antagonistic are given unnecessary, if you like, publicity. And you know, publicity to people who are enemies of the state, let me use that word, it's like oxygen, according to Margaret Thatcher. When you give publicity to the terrorists, it's like oxygen, you are giving them oxygen. So notwithstanding, there are people that the media should have, to me, left to me, this is my personal opinion, shouldn't come anywhere given any kind of publicity. Yes, so the media in that department, notwithstanding that a lot, I mean, people should be given access to express their feeling about government. But then there are some people, no business whatsoever, accessing public media or platforms.
Thank you so much, Ali. We'll come back to you. Just hold it there for now. Before I go to Timi Priye, I have asked Abdullah from Tegina where he was on June 12th. 1993. I've also asked Jamiu, and he has told us how emotional it was for them and the family on that day. I'm sure you voted, right?
No, I wasn't old enough to vote.
Okay, you're not old enough to vote. Okay, beautiful. Now, let me go to Professor Abiodu. Where were you on June 12, 1993?
Oh, very well. Like,
that's
fine. Like Ali said in Kano, I was very active on the field. I was in the center of it all as a professional journalist, you know, covering politics for the Guardian newspapers. You know, I used to be NEC those days, National Electoral Commission. NEC office used to be in Area 10, where we have our market quarters now. And we sat on the road, you know, all through the period, awaiting the result. We saw the movement, you know, of Professor Humphrey Rose, who then chairman of NEC, you know, to the villa. He was summoned to the villa. We saw how the chalkboard, you know, those days, of course, no digital board, everything, chalkboard, how the results were being written. 13 states already out. We already had the result across the country, but we're just waiting for official declaration.
So in essence, you were practicing.
I was a practicing journalist, well alive to everything. And after the annulment, you know, of course, I covered the judicial processes, justice, basic payment, night judgment around 9 o'clock. I witnessed Femi Falana, all the activities of these activists, all through the process.
Yes.
I remember every process, you know, like the back of my hand. You know, I mean, sometimes it shocks me that many years after, you know, you can still remember these things, how it played out and how we have evolved up to this stage. So it's all very, very interesting. Some of my colleagues that were covered it together are still doing very well. Olusegun Adeni was also there with us. Mr. Maseye was there. We're all on the Tunde Rahman. Ali was in Kano. We're all there. So we're active on the field, and it's all glory to God that we have come this far.
All that is history now.
Yeah, it's history.
We are all thinking place of June 12. Well, let me go to Timi Priye. Again, we are trying to make it on a lighter note now. Where were you on June 12, 1993?
To declare that I am not so rich in age like all of you. So on June 12th, I was in a place called Ahoda in Rivers State, but I was only 10 years old. Nonetheless, I was well aware of political happenings because the SDP NRC campaign messages on television were so attractive to kids that we were all interested. So I was just newly out of primary school waiting to start JS1 when all of those happened. So I know I was looking at the news with my parents on the day when the election happened, June 12th, and then the disappointment that hit us when we heard that despite all of the good work that Professor Humphrey Wosu did, the election result may not be announced. And it was for us a very bitter period, besides the fact that MK Abiola, who we were all looking to have as our president, because even in our schools we were so happy. They say, oh, Abiola is coming, so our kids were happy. But beyond the loss that we had to suffer when Abiola no longer was declared, was that I lost a cousin to the post-June 12th crisis in Lagos. He was part of the protest, and we heard he was killed, but up to today his body was never found. So it is a permanent scar on our minds that keeps reminding us of the importance of this democracy that we have. So on June 12th, I was well aware, but just a small boy growing up.
Just before I sign it off, propelling from there, or pulling the spirit from there, you were just 10 years old, and over time, 1999 up to now, we're looking at 20 years plus. Why would somebody, what the salt calls himself a Nigerian, a patriotic Nigerian, toy with democracy? Why?
It's a good question you've asked, and I think that goes both to citizens and leaders. Many of them who are even old enough to understand the toils that people had to go through. Journalists were jailed, some disappeared forever, and some civil society people had to go on exile. And then remember the activities of Nadeku and all that. So this democracy was hard-won. People struggled, people died to have this democracy. That is why we believe that both government officials and citizens must understand that this democracy must be safeguarded. We must protect it. There are issues, no doubt. There are issues, but we do not believe a way to solve the problem in the house is to bring down the house. We don't think so. That is why we call on everyone to do what is right, and let us be more propositional rather than oppositional when it comes to addressing issues that border on our national unity and democratic growth.
Thank you so much, Timipriye Allison, Head of Programs, Center for Democracy and Development. It was nice having you on our program on this segment.
Having me.
Sustain the discussion on national security. Ali, I know the last question I ask you is how well has the media fared regarding security? And by your opinion, you said it was personal. You said some media organizations have no business relating with people who don't have the unity or interest of Nigeria at heart. I know you say it's an issue of ethical concerns, but would you say in terms of media and sustaining national security, has the media fared well?
Well, I will not say it's not a yes and no answer, really, because you have to also look at the level of involvement of the media itself in trying to go dig the facts to understand them. But I would say the mainstream media has been has been more restrained, so to say. They'll be more restrained, but sometimes also I have seen a couple of times where mainstream media, they have given detailed description of, sensitive matters of national security out in the public domain. One would say maybe because of the competition is very stiff. People want to go to town with the news first, and because of the very keen challenge, if you like, contest, or even by digital media that want to go also to town with the stories, you see that there are instances where the media has compromised national security. And I don't know whether it's the gatekeeping there that has failed or some interest beyond gatekeeping. Sometimes you can isolate or dissociate political, even material interest from the stories that make some of our headlines. You can't take that away. This is a universal fact. It's not restricted to Nigerian media environment, or it's a global thing. But then the media, especially in the fight against terrorism and insurgency and the threat to national disarmament, you will say the media has not been really more restrained, even the mainstream. And this is where I think it's important to have people who are really well trained in gatekeeping. But that is not saying not to report what has actually happened. What I'm against is revealing state security for, if you like, mass consumption. Now that could pose as a threat I'll give you an instance. There was a time a national newspaper went to town with troops movement, the kind of armament in the armory, the number of troops being dipped to fight insurgency in the northeast. To me, that is compromising national security. If at all, unless of course, even that medium was misled. So in instances like this, you will say, yeah, the media has not been really circumspect. But then you expect that also, given sometimes bad news is good news. It has always been so when you have the media trying to inform the citizenry about, but then when you have so much detail out there, I think that is injurious to national security. But nothing wrong in the media given, updating the Nigerian people or the Nigerian people in diaspora or any part of the earth with a reportage of what's going on back home. Now, the slack here is sometimes the media is too detailed, and then you begin to wonder its sources. And then sometimes, even when you have talk shows or you find panelists discussing national security, either active, especially when you have retired military personnel discussing national security. Some of them, they can be very detailed, especially on talk shows. So I think this is the time we become a little bit more restrained. And also the government. Sometimes the government is too forward. Spokesmen of government, especially in military cycle, there are instances where they should be more restrained. You don't need to give the number of troops deployed. Given that minute detail, to me, is a no-no, because you are talking of national security, and meanwhile the enemy is watching, is listening, is reading. So it's quite, it's a kind of delicate situation. But you see, part of the element of good governance is also availability of information, how government is run the country. But in matters of strategic military deployment, I think we should be a little bit more restrained on the part of people speaking on behalf of the armed forces, and the media also should be a little, even if it gets an exclusive. There are instances for the sake of national interest, you don't give so much detail, even if we have it from an authentic source, unless, of course, there is an agenda which is not visible to the ordinary eye. Yes. So I would say yes, the media should be a little bit more circumspect, yet keeping should be more enhanced, and because one slight error could set the country, because as it is, the nation is very fragile, is very delicate, and
well, Ali, let me hold it there for now. I'll still come back to you to sustain other perspectives from various angles we may be taking you from. And back here in Abuja, you listen to Ali, but let me start with you this time around.
Okay.
The report we took before I went to Ali had to do with national security, and he raised germane issues there. But why should we politicize security as a people? So, national security and patriotism. What's your reaction?
Well, national security is the core, and that is actually the biggest problem we have right now, because I think it's important for Nigerians, as I said before, to participate more. And part of participation in terms of information, passing information. When there's a problem, it starts from the community level. And when the problem starts, there's meant to be information passed to government. But we in Nigeria, we have this culture of, oh, I'm not going to say anything. People don't want to talk. They don't want to snitch. Even within a house, if the houseboy and the driver, they will say, oh, somebody is stealing money, but I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to say anything. So when there's no information, there's no way that government is going to know exactly what's happening. Because how many people there are in Nigeria? Like almost 200 million people. How many policemen, how many soldiers, how many NSCDC officials do we have that we can actually do so much work without the right information actually being passed? So I think the most important thing is the issue of information. People have to be more generous with that. And apart from that, people also have to because it's a joint responsibility. In America, for example, They always say it, whistleblower. Over here in Nigeria, when we talk about whistleblower, we always refer to the people that, expose corruption and they get 1 or 2% of whatever they've exposed. Whistleblower should actually be done even if you're not going to get any kind of reward, especially when it comes to security of lives, because these people that are communicating or committing these atrocities, they're from communities, and the people living with them already have an idea of something happening. So they should actually pass the information as soon as possible, and even before it even reaches the stage of carrying out attacks. So I think we have to first look at it from that angle. That's the first way, and that's why I always tell people that the traditional rulers have to be given a more constitutional role, because they are the grassroots and they will actually be very, very, very effective in this issue of encouraging their people to actually pass more information, and they do it in a way that you will not expose yourself to danger. But when it comes to politicizing it and using it against a government, if a government is not performing when all these fundamentals are met, then we can say that the government is actually not doing what it's supposed to do. But if we are not actually giving them information and we expect them to come all the way from here all the way to where we live in our local government, I think it's asking for too much.
Okay. Up till date, for some time I've not been to my village. If you go to the village and you maybe went out for some engagements and you're back in the late hours, just walking alone, before you get to your family home, somebody will accost you to insist, because they've not been seeing you around. Who are you? We have not seen you for some time. What brought you? Even when they know you're from there, they subject you. That leads me to this question: what role should the citizens play? Because most times it's as though it should be just government. When they hear a bomb blast, government. Like for the politicians, some when they hear a bomb blast, the government in power. What role should the citizens play? If today we are celebrating Democracy Day and we are praying that we build it, develop it, for us having a clear-cut democratic culture. You have talked about us trying to rejig it a bit to have some peculiarity with Nigeria, not just hook, line and sinker American-style democracy. So what role should Nigerians as a people, not those in government, play
citizens
in national security?
That's a very valid question, no doubt. Anywhere in the world, I do know that citizens have responsibility. Even if it is not statutory, it is innate or implied. Expected. Because the government, in part of the Leviathan Agreement, you concede your rights to the state to protect you, but in asking the state to protect you, you also have a duty to be responsible to the state at the level of investing your hope, at the level of patriotism, at the level of nationalism, so that the state can as well be enamored and encouraged to support you. So citizens have a responsibility, but let's not forget again that there are certain things that also can make the citizens to feel excluded. When citizens see obvious luxuriation, obvious opulence, a lethargy on the part of the leadership to propel them, to satisfy them, to meet their yearnings and aspiration, not just on a one-off basis, but on a continuous basis. Those things can make citizens to lose faith, So it can be very tough in that kind of environment for us to now push responsibility back to the citizen and say, look, you have a role to play by supporting government. But it's not to say that because they should take advantage of that and resort to criminality. No, that's not what we're saying. We're only saying that government has more responsibility. The state has more responsibility because citizens have surrendered all their powers, sometimes even their rights to the state to protect them. But what happens in some matrices is that you will now see the states coming up with some kind of leaders that will be an outlier, that word again, that will make the difference in terms of leadership, make the difference, becoming reformist, becoming revolutionary, and being able to galvanize the citizens to have a sense of commonness, an absolute sense of belonging, such that there will be increased patriotism, increased nationalism, and increased faith in the system. Now, it will take us to some examples. If you see an Israeli citizen now, or the British citizen, or an American citizen, if you compare citizens in those countries, they are markedly different from citizenship in African countries, and of course the reasons are clear, because of the extent to which the states in those countries have gone, to protect the rights, aspirations and hopes, of those citizens. You know, so it's a construction. It's something that we have to be conscious about. You know, and the consciousness will begin from government, from the state, realizing that I have an obligation to the people, I have an obligation to the citizens, and that obligation should be reflected in consensus provisions of infrastructures and utilities, you know, consistent with the Leviathan and in line with the constitutional provisions. You know, so I agree that there's a dialectical interconnection between the two, but one of them has more advantage, has more role to play, and that one is government in actually pulling in the citizen in terms of arousing a sense of belonging, a sense of appreciation of the entity that the state represents.
Okay. Well, on a day like this, years back, you hear June 12 and until it was institutionalized and made a law in the country, June 12 was only heard about in the southwest, mostly in Lagos. On a day like this, here there are holidays, and we are putting something together. And now let's do a comparative analysis. Before June 12 was institutionalized in Nigeria as Democracy Day, on a day like this, Lagos, southwestern part of Nigeria should be boiling. But from what we have seen, calm and collected.
Well, it happens really, and it just tells us that things can change. Nothing is really permanent, and do not forget as well that the recognition of June 12, which this administration commendably and remarkably did, you know, didn't just come on a platter of gold. It came through long years of agitations, you know, for that election, which was a watershed, like Ali earlier acknowledged, you know, because it diminished all our classifiers, all our dividers. You know, it just diminished them as if they never existed. We had a Muslim ticket, and that's why we keep saying that it's a watershed. It was a monumental one. Abiola was gradually emerging as a national hero. Now, do not forget that one of the bane of this country is that over the years has been that the fact that we have actually lacked a national hero, somebody who will just come and galvanize the populace, you know, integrate us irrespective of our many divides. Abiola was gradually emerging like that because he had a network of friends across the country. His business empire was thriving, you know, and his politics was also rose on the back of his previous network. So the fact that kind of we had a tragedy of June 12 because somebody didn't want to leave power, you know, and of course he died in the process. It didn't mean that the cause, you know, the cause that he represented was definitely going to outlive him, and that's what happened, you know. So yes, there were agitations. The fact that it began from the southwest, it could maybe be instructive to some extent because, of course, it's from that area. But overall, Nigerians eventually recognized it, you know, through the instrumentality of the Buhari administration, which is why the Buhari administration recognizing June 12 is going to go down in history as one of the major achievements of this administration in recognizing that date and almost recognizing the place of Abiola as maybe a former president of this country. Yes, we're not too far from that. That would have been a different ball game, but the extent to which the administration went is actually a major monumental achievement, you know, that will hardly be forgotten. Okay. Because it was nationalized. The election was elevated, and it remains something that we should be celebratory about, you know, on every June 12th, okay, as the case could be.
Let me allow Jamil relate to that briefly before we go to other issues. I know when June 12th was formally institutionalized last year, all this was celebrated. The National Stadium was christened after your late dad, Moshood Abiola National Stadium. And today, Lagos, that used to be boiling on a day like this because of not recognizing June 12th, is calm and collected. Introduction.
Well, it's good, and then it's calm because people have gotten what they wanted. You know, this is something that was very, very, very obvious to everyone, but people for some reason refused to recognize it. But one thing is that there's a lot actually gained from June 12 other than, you know, other than just recognizing my father. You know, we can actually as a country use June 12 as a unifying force for the country, because it's a time that we all, as the journalist said a couple of minutes ago, we put all the four things, religion, ethnicity, we put all that aside and we voted for what we felt was merit. I think we can go back in that because it's still the same Nigeria. We're still the same Nigerians. If we could do it before, we can do it again. So I think we should look beyond just June 12th as a past date. We should look at June 12th for a future relevance, which is how we as Nigerians can see it at the time that we came together and how we can actually use that to come back together again. Because, you know, when we have all this animosity and all this distrust, we can actually build on what we actually had on June 12th to actually bring or rekindle the passion of our patriotism. Because June 12th, I think we should look at as a source of motivation and inspiration going forward, so that we can actually gain from this tragedy more effectively towards the future. I think June 12th should be looked at as a unifier.
Okay. When we shall be going to Kano shortly, as soon as the signals from Kano are up again. Quite revealing there, 23 million female-owned SMEs in Nigeria currently.
Yeah, it is very interesting to see that we're beginning to tend to sectors that are ordinarily hit at a disadvantage, you know, and the women folk is a very critical sector in that regard, you know, so if we're paying greater attention to them and it's being reflected in their participation in a vital economic segment like the SMEs, then that's really gratifying. Do not forget that economies are largely stimulated by some of these small and medium scale enterprises, because they have a way of triggering multipliers, you know, which rubs off on through consumption, eventually rubbing off on the micro and macroeconomic indices. So the fact that we're able to register this through the prism of women is very commendable, like I said earlier. But more importantly, we need to also go further. We are seeing the increasing recognition of women in the economic sphere. What about in the political sphere? I'm aware that there are bills in the legislature working towards this, but in addition to the bills as well is the need for us to begin changing the narrative around the dominance around patriarchy, realizing that the women folk, you know, are very, very important across institutions, far beyond the family institution to the secular ones, you know. But again, there are some impediments around culture, around religion, you know, which needs addressing. We are likely silent about these impediments, but we need to begin to make conscious efforts to address to addressing some of these impediments, you know, so that we can move from the level that we are now, which makes us look primitive, look pedestrian in terms of how we recognize vulnerable, disadvantaged groups, you know, to a level where we could say that we are becoming increasingly civilized, because civilization is a wholesome thing, it's a holistic thing. It's not something you look at from only one sector, maybe through development, infrastructures, employment. No, it also comes through our attitude, how we regard ourselves, you know, how we're able to show concern for ourselves, whether you are strong or weak. How do we bring about harmony in the process? So beyond us talking about ethnic harmony, religious harmony, we need to also talk about, you know, the harmony of the sectors. You know, how well are we doing this? You know, it's very important. We are seeing the narrative, we are seeing discussions coming, going towards that line with these statistics you just roll out. But we need these things to be sustained, you know, on a much more on a longer lasting basis. It shouldn't just be a one-off thing.
Okay. We are in post-Beijing, and within post-Beijing, we are talking about 12 critical areas of concern. And if by today, by the last report, 23 million female-owned SMEs, would you say truly that conference and now and indeed the policy of inclusivity by the current administration is playing out?
It's actually playing out, and it's about time, because if we look at countries like India and we give them credit for their economic growth and the four tigers in Asia, we'll find out that a lot of it came from these small and medium scale businesses. And if we have women given a better role and they are playing a more active role in commercial activity, then definitely it's going to have a very, very positive multiplier effect in the medium and in the long term for a country to grow. Already, you are from the South, you know that women there play a very fantastic role, and they're very, play a very positive role in the family, beyond the family setting. And like, for the fact that this is happening now, it actually gives me a lot of, I'm very optimistic about the future, because this is going to actually have a very, very telling effect very near in the future. And it shows that the level of maturity is changing, and we're having a cultural shift, because before we encourage women to stay at home and to play a very traditional role, but we can see that Nigeria has actually, or Nigerians have drawn a line on the sand, and we're moving forward. So this is important. But as he said, we also have to carry that into the political angle as well, to make sure that, in the cabinet, a certain percentage are women, and, even in the House of Assembly, House of Representatives, and Senate, because we need women to be more actively involved, because a lot of problems in society are better understood by the people that have that problem, and the female segment of society have unique problems that we as men might not understand. So the more representation they have in the government will actually go a long way in government being able to craft policies that will better address the general population, including women, that I believe are more than half of the population of the country.
But I hope you don't mind I ask you this. Besides her political stand, your late mom, Kudirat Abiola, would you say, besides her political stand, her women emancipation position, with what you've heard now, is that fulfilling?
It's fulfilling, because that actually, all that is happening now is what she had always believed in. As a matter of fact, before entering politics, she was one of the largest suppliers of pharmaceuticals in Nigeria. She was at one point importing more than 30-40 containers a month, at the age of 31 years old. So she always believed in women empowerment, and that's why my sister Hafsat Abiola formed the Kudrat Abiola initiative, so that she can empower women in the grassroots to get more actively involved in business and also in the political atmosphere. And she is now currently the president of Women in Africa. So it is quite interesting.
So it's quite revealing and fulfilling.
It's fulfilling.
Okay. Let's go to Kano. Ali, sorry, your signals dropped, and I was just about asking you this before your signals dropped. I'm still very particular about the media. Mostly, you use the word that there is need for, all the signals have dropped again, and we'll still come back to Kano. That is really beyond our control. Well, you are a media practitioner, more or less. Was a journalist ever a journalist?
Yeah, I'm a media teacher.
As much as today you are at the education end, you fall fully within the ambit of the gatekeeping platform of the media. I was just about asking Ali, what role should the media play? Whether we like it or not, the media also has a patriotic role to play. You will find a journalist from other clime go to the point of trying to expose the defense arsenals of his country. So what role should the media play in all this, in national security?
Often
we have talked about politicizing security in Nigeria, playing to politics, but the media also have a critical role to play.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. There's no role, there's no job really that does not come with some sense of responsibility, because first of all, you exist within the sovereignty, you exist within the confines of a nation, and you have a natural responsibility to the states, to protect the states that you exist in. And it doesn't matter what your organizational motivation is. You first of all have to understand that without the sovereign nation that you're existing in, you may not be able to function well. And that's why we have that ethical obligation, to be responsible. Even in theory, we talk about the social responsibility theory, the libertarian theory. All these things are implied in some of these arguments, some of these notions around the understanding of media. So we have high levels of responsibility. But against that background, we also have to understand that sometimes, again, some of these understanding, some of these notions are reshaped by our lived experiences, our peccadillos, our predilections as a people, which is why the onus is now on the practitioner, to rise above those temptations and those predilections, and privilege the interests of the state above his own interest. That's the clarion call that we have had severally in nations and societies, and that's why you see some media in some nations are freer first, some are much more responsible than the others, because they exist first realizing that their state is supreme, that the interest of their state should be privileged over the interest of over self-interest or the interest of some mischief makers who ordinarily want to sponsor them. And I will just tell you again, that's why in cultures we have heard about embellishing media practitioners within military circles during battles. This is not ordinary. It's just for them, rightly or wrongly or correctly or incorrectly, to be restricted, to be moderated in the kind of report that they will do. So they are embellishing them, putting them in the center of action so that they can be much more informed from the point of view of the combatants, not necessarily to stifle them or to prevent them from being from freely doing their job, but for them to be to be informed from the point of view of the combatant, realizing that there's a nobler role that they are playing, as professionals, and that the forces who are fighting too are also making great sacrifices, playing even a much more nobler role for the nation that they belong to. So these things are processes, but we have to come to that understanding. And again, the space of modern communication technology has made it so much imprecise, so much nebulous, where we have digital media, social media, so you see mischief makers, nihilists, terrorists taking advantage of this. That's the crisis we're also dealing with, the crisis of the age, and that's why we're talking about the need for increased media education, media literacy, so that people can largely be able to discern between the good, the bad, and the ugly. And of course, they'll make up their mind, not just take things hook, line, and sinker, because we do not know the extent to which the liberalization of media space will be. It's a continuing thing because technology is growing, but of course, we have overall our own obligation, which is to be responsible citizens, responsible professionals, first and foremost.
Okay, just as a recap, I know my colleague Fisayo hinged on this largely, but just a snippet of it. Mr. President's broadcast to Nigerians today, how did it touch you?
Well, it was very, very, it hit the nail in the head, because as a writer, the first book I wrote was called Realistic Hopes, and what I emphasized on in that book was youth taking a role, participating. And one thing that the president said was that he wants to actually tackle youth employment, and that book also touched on poverty. I wrote that book around 2012, almost 10 years ago, and that is because I know very well that those two issues are like a ticking time bomb. You don't address them, everything is going to blow up, and so in Realistic Hopes, I kept focusing on that. My hero was actually representing the two. He was poor and he was part of the youth, and at the end of the day, the president, in that country I read about was in Egypt, actually addressed the problem in his speech, and he actually empowered the youth because he wants to use them to tackle poverty. So I was very, very touched, and I'm very happy that he mentioned what he mentioned. And I'm also happy as well about the issue of the CBN focusing on agriculture and all of that, because that further touches on what I just mentioned, because with agriculture we can tackle poverty and we can actually create youth employment. So it's like killing two birds with a stone. So the speech hit the nail in the head, and I'm glad that this is his vision for Nigeria, and I'm glad that he also announced he's going to actually come up with another strategy and will give us more details later on. So this is what we need, a visionary leadership, and for us to now as citizens play our own role, because if the head is good and the other part not good, it's not going to work out. So it's like a team effort. So happy about that.
Democracy in itself, besides the fact that they will say it's government for the people, by the people, and name it, it has some colorations that you cannot wish away. Permanent interest, no permanent enemies. It keeps evolving, and I know sometime at some point in the discussion I try to say, is there any way at some point we say, okay, let's now also adjust this democracy we have fashioned after the United States of America to have the full coloration of Nigeria. But in achieving that, let's look at this issue, the elite factor and the evolving Nigerian democracy.
That's a fundamental one. In any system really, even from history, the elites often have very significant role to play, and in the evolution of that society. And when we're talking about elites now, it's not just about those who are lettered, maybe those who are educated. No, elites can be can be much more involving. You know, it goes beyond the intelligentsia to also include those who can play or who are playing leadership roles in different sectors, like Jamil said earlier, the traditional rulers, the religious leaders, who are probably, they may not be vast in Western education, but as long as they can be opinion molders, you know, they represent a substantial section of the elite. And of course, they are the driving force of change and development, you know, because they first of all they are ordinarily expected to have better understanding, better appreciation, you know, of what situations these situations are. So against that background, you will say that our own elite will have a role to play. But beyond that is also to say that in many years, the elites have failed the people, you know, because they have been the bane of development crisis. They have been in the center of it, and otherwise we should have made much progress than we are making. But maybe we should also identify, for once, you know, the present president. He came in on the back of integrity and credibility, and largely he has sustained that. Even though some people will disagree with this, but he has sustained that because, very much unlike his predecessors, I've never, correct me if I'm wrong, I've never had him building a castle somewhere or building a mansion on a hill. He still remained himself after 6 years in power. I've not heard of some of these personal things that we hear about some former presidents or around him, that he's doing this, he's doing that. So he has kept that largely, you know, but maybe we could say that it has not permitted all his rank, all members of his lieutenants or so. That's another argument anyway. But from his own person, you know, even his resources, you can actually argue that it probably looks like he's framed to some extent. So to that extent, we could say that, you know, he represents, you know, one shade of the kind of elite that we probably need in this country. Somebody that cherishes some values, some virtues, you know, from where others can learn from, because those are the kind of exemplars that we need. People who can be differently and positively identified, you know, identified with you know, some positive things that others can learn from. You know, we do not want a situation where the population of the elite is made up of people who are prebendal, people who are less sacrificial, you know, people who are just interested in festering their nests and those of their families, you know. And that's why we're talking about the failure of institutions, because those individuals, you know, see themselves as being higher than the institutions, whereas it should be the other way around. So a lot more responsibility on the elite as well, you know, and it is not too late.
Okay, I hear Ali is back in Kano. Ali, directing this question at you, just listen to me copiously, and because it will be a bit delicate if you don't get it right. Listening to the old stanza of the Nigerian national anthem, if I can recall clearly, it says, "Nigeria, we hail thee, our own dear native land," blah blah blah, and it now says, "Though tribe and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand. Nigerians all are proud to serve a sovereign motherland." Yes, we now say, "Arise to come petrol," blah blah blah. From the dreams of our forefathers to where we are, the elite factor and Nigeria's development for tomorrow. Okay, Ali, my simple question, though you lost the beauty of it, is the elite factor, the vision of our forefathers, our founding fathers, where Nigeria is, and the hope for tomorrow, judging from the old stanza of the old national anthem of Nigeria. And the conclusion was, "Though tribe and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand."
Well, I would say their vision, if what had transpired from post-colonial Nigeria, you see that their vision has not been really realized. Why? Because especially after the first military incursion into the political arena, you see that vision was truncated. And what happened after the counter coup of July 1966, the efforts of our founding fathers to have a united country through as encapsulated in that stanza you quoted, of the national anthem. You see that the seeds of discord were sown by the first military coup. Take it or leave it, I think that truncated the vision of our founding fathers. Yes, there were divisions, along the fault lines, but then they were not so prominent as they are today. And I must here also laid at the doorsteps of the elite, the Nigerian elite. Over the years now, the Nigerian, regrettably, they have not really risen above the differences in tribe and tongue and ethnicity. We've had instances even before the colonial intrusion of the divisions along, African societies, they've always been segmented. When the colonial master came, the colonial intrusion tried to wield together, some people say, much dissimilar ethnic groups, but I sometimes disagree with that postulation. Why? Because even before the colonial intrusion and post-colonial Nigeria, you find out that Nigerians have related differently via commerce, leading to fusion of language. There are ethnic groups that are united by their common language. You find out 13 words, they are prominent in virtually all the languages, all the major languages. Now, coming back to this, the vision of our founding fathers vis-a-vis the stanza of the first post-colonial anthem, has it been, certainly we know where our founding fathers wanted to be. Why? Because of some of these things I listed, the first civil military coup, the counter coup, and the civil war. But what happened after the civil war? I must say here, immediately after the first civil war in 1970, it was a remarkable healing, thanks largely to the government of General Gawan. If you remember the slogan then, his name, go on with one Nigeria, and then this idea of no victor, no vanquished. And then the government of the day at that time, decisive steps to unite the countries. The NYSC scheme was introduced, if you recall, in 1973. Unity colleges were introduced, and the Nigerian Federation was linked by federal routes, making movement, facilitating trade and commerce among the disparate and various regions, leading to the creation of more states in 1967, which also fostered national unity. For the first time, even before, after Civil War, you find that Nigerians, in no time, the 3 R's, reconciliation, reconstruction, and I've forgotten the third R, leading to the emergence of a number 2 citizen from the southeast, which was quite remarkable. Few nations go through that rapid reconstruction and reconciliation after a civil war. But in between 1970 and 1979, you find that a lot of healing, and then you think there was hope for a more united Nigeria. But I would say, what is causing this this discord nationwide is because the Nigerian elite, unfortunately, sometimes they sabotage their own enlightened self-interest. What I mean, when they bandy all these fault lines to win election, actually they are sowing the seeds of discord. Elites anywhere without the elite consensus, without the elite having a common vision, and this elite, like Professor Abiodun listed, elites not necessarily have to be lettered or highly educated. Well, it's part of it, because education is about social mobility. What happened? The clergy, the traditional rulers, and people who shape and mold public opinion, they're all part of the elite. But then you find the elite class, they are always having clashing vision and not having a common united front for the progress of the nation. And that's why their followers, they look at them. And someone argued that in Nigeria is truly a classless society, because you find out the elite and the followers and the ordinary folks have the same attitude, and which is regrettable. When you have the elite and the ordinary folks, they think and act alike. It's only in this country you have people who are academics speaking and acting like street urchins. It's only in this country you have people superintending over the labor power, speaking like vagabonds. You find them speaking. You find instances where governors speak like ordinary street urchins. So really here, the Nigerian elite must do a retrospection and really find how their utterances and their action or inaction impacts negatively on the ordinary folk. So Nigerian elite, they have a lot of work to do. It's good for them first to begin with a sincere conversation among themselves, and also to expand the space to give people hope, their followers. Often at times when the Nigerian elite loses, then everybody should lose. We've had instances. Some of the issues going around the country in the various geopoliticals is actually because a section of the elite is feeling aggrieved, either it has lost political power or economic access to state resources, and that's why they are throwing the bathwater along with the baby. If I lose, everybody loses. So it's not a very enlightened position, if you ask me. So, and I think the Nigerian elite really should have a rethink, come together, think. They may have their different, but then if they don't have a common vision, that's why problem. And that's why Abiola is one. Let's go back to the issue of June 12. Because he was able to build a network of expansive social cycle and even political cycle, and exhibited a remarkable ability to accommodate shades of opinion and then give hope to ordinary Nigerians. And that's why in Kano he won an election. The people of Kano rejected their own son because they could relate to Abiola. So in my own view, why will it take to have an elite like Abiola, who was a unifier, like Mr. Abiola there, Gino said, June 12 is a unifier, but you see, just like leader Grayson, the struggle also to actualize June 12 post annulment became a regional thing. It was a national mandate reduced to an to a sectional, regional struggle for the actualization, and in the process antagonizing people who ordinarily voted for Abiola because they related to him as a pan-Nigerian with a pan-Nigerian vision. So really, the Nigerian elite, they have a lot of work to do, because if the boat is finally rocked, it's largely because of they could not locate their own self-enlightening interests, pursue it, and then carry everybody along.
Ali, it was nice getting that perspective from you, and I don't want to take a risk. Your signals are freezing. I would have said I'll take another shot on you, but at this point, thank you so much for being part of the program, Ali, Deputy President, Nigerian Guild of Editors. Nigerian Guild of Editors.
Having me.
Joined us from our Kano station. And moving on now, the shift of Democracy Day from May 29 to June 12th by President Muhammadu Buhari is of great significance, as it is a reflection of the premium the present administration places on sustaining democratic governance, given the political history of Nigeria. The report.
One date that has remained on the lips of Nigerians is June 12, which has today become the face of democracy in Nigeria, as the President Muhammadu Buhari administration has instituted it. Nigerians resident in Port Harcourt say the date marked a turning point in Nigeria's long march to democracy. According to them, the annulment of the election did not take away the fact that it has been adjudged the freest and fairest election in the history of Nigeria.
It was a time when Nigerians as a whole, for once in their lifetime, said yes. They said that yes resoundingly, but at the end of the day, it was truncated.
1993 elections. Well, it's regarded in the annals of this country, it's regarded as the freest and fairest of all the elections, because I was around then and I actually voted.
They have, however, called on contemporary leaders in Nigeria to learn from June 12 experience and respect democratic principles and institutions for the sustenance of the world-acclaimed best form of government.
We have to disabuse our mind with respect to religion, tribalism, and all that.
A call for tolerance and ethnic cohesion among Nigerians for the peace and unity of the country.
This is the very popular Isaac Borough Park here in Port Harcourt. This park is named after late Major Isaac Adaka Borough, who died as a soldier in the struggle to keep Nigeria one. In Port Harcourt, Democrcy, NTA News.
That report there from Port Harcourt hinges on what we have been talking about. No matter how we look at it, Nigeria remains one. So,
yes, the unity of this country is not negotiable. Some people, are clamoring, but I know that they're just a loud minority, because the most Nigerians know we've come too far to go back. By the grace of God, I don't think this country is going to split, because God made Nigeria what it is for a reason. When they say it's the giant of Africa, yes, we are still going to reach our potential, but that unity, that giant of Africa status will never leave Nigeria by the grace of God. Whatever misunderstandings we have, whatever conflicts we have, we will solve them, and we will not only get like before, we even get better than before.
thank you very much. Okay.
I agree with him with his prayers, because if you look, it's always better to look forward than looking backwards. We've been more than 60 years, as an independent nation, and of course, we have tried, despite all the challenges, to build a commonness. We've tried to unite ourselves, and I do say that there's no country in the world that is completely homogeneous, and there's no country that is completely heterogeneous. What happens is that most of them continue to work and strive, at bringing about harmony as a pedestal for progress, despite their conditions. So Nigeria's case should not be different. We shouldn't look backwards, but we'll try to continue to look forward. And looking forward means that, in our difference, in our diversity, there can be unity and progress.
Okay. We look forward to yet another Democracy Day in the year 2022. For this year, that does it for this year's special edition of the program. On behalf of all of us, our guests, all those who sent in reports and reactions, thanks for watching. And at this point, we'll sign off this segment of the program